Good morning, everyone. Thank you all again so much for joining us this morning to learn more about HB 495 and what it means for St. Louis and our greater communities. My name is Rika White, and I'm the Criminal Justice Policy Manager at Empower, Missouri, and I'll be facilitating today with my colleague, Gwen Smith-Moore. I'll let you introduce yourself, Gwen.
Thank you so much, Rika. Yeah, Gwen Smith-Moore, Criminal Justice Policy Manager with Empower. And yeah, we're excited to bring you a special edition of our coalition meeting today. Oh,
Yes,
sorry, just realizing I'm not on video. Thanks, Rika.
it's okay. Gwen and we are our dynamic duo for the Criminal Justice Policy Team at Empower, and we host a Criminal Justice Coalition call 2 times a month during the legislative session and monthly outside of the legislative session. During our coalition calls, we focus and hone in on different topics like HB 495, as well as different things that are happening in the Capitol. So we are so honored and thankful that you guys chose to be with us this morning. I also have two special guest speakers that I will be introducing, well, letting them introduce themselves as well. Next slide. Oh. So Mallory is our executive director at Empower. Mallory, if you'd like to introduce yourself for those who may not know you.
Hey everyone, good morning. So glad to be here with you. I'm a lifelong St. Louis resident and now homeowner for the last, gosh, I don't know, 15 years or so in St. Louis City. And I have been the executive director here at Empower for about 4.5 years. Good to be
Thank
with
you.
you.
And Annie Rice with Arch City Defenders. Would you like to
Hi,
introduce
good,
yourself?
yeah, good morning. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Annie Rice. I forgot it. We just changed my title. I am Senior Counsel for Policy and Partnerships now. But no worries on that. Pronouns are she, her. I started at Arch City Defenders back in August of 2023. And prior to that, I was an alderwoman in the city of St. Louis from 2018 to 2023. And happy to be here with you all. Excited, Empower does such great work, and this is a great coalition. Sorry for the subject, but glad to be here with you, breaking it all down.
Thank you for that. And just some logistical background, I would like to encourage all participants to stay muted. However, feel free to put any questions or comments you have in the chat and we will get to them. And we have a couple of our colleagues at Empower here that will be monitoring the chat to respond to you all. Please also drop your name and where your location that you're tuning in from and your organization, if any, in the chat as well. Thank you for joining us. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Gwen.
Thank you so much, Rika. And thank you, everybody, all of our CJC members and everyone else that is joining us today. Mallory and myself are going to kind of start with just a quick and dirty overview of HB 495, kind of how it came to be, the context of the last couple years that created the grounds for its very quick passage this year, a quick summary of kind of what that passage and its pathway through the chambers looks like this session, what actually is in HB 495. What does it say about this board of directors and how that will operate? And then I'm going to share a couple facts and figures about the St. Louis budget and were our kind of current fiscal estimates to stay the same when HB 495's budget requirements are fully instated in 2028. How much money of an increase are we actually talking about to the St. Louis City Police budget? And then last but not least, a very quick overview of some of the other provisions that were included in 495. 495 was a massive criminal justice omnibus bill. So although the primary focus of today's webinar is breaking down the impact on St. Louis City, we are going to talk about just very quickly the other provisions, some of which are a reason to celebrate this otherwise kind of somber note. So, Mallory, I will pass it off to you to provide us some context on this issue.
Yeah, thanks, Gwen. You can go to the next slide. There we go. Oh, no, back. There it is. Yeah, so this bill is not new. We have testified it here against it here at Empower every year for at least the last 5 years. So starting in 2021, this is something that Senator Nick Schroer, who at the time was still in the House of Representatives, felt really passionate about, and for a while was kind of out there working on his own. We have seen many iterations of this bill over time. Often, when you see a piece of language that's filed year after year after year, it's roughly the same, right? It doesn't change a lot. It's got a pretty clear purpose and a pretty clear pathway. I will say that is not been the case with the St. Louis Police Takeover Bill. There have been significant revisions and different approaches over the years. For a couple of years, it was filed as a JR, which a joint resolution, which would mean that it would need to have gone back on the ballot. For those who may remember, we in the city of St. Louis just got control of our police department back in 2012, so 13 years ago. Before then, state control was the law of the land in the city of St. Louis for many, many years. And there was a big push by activists and also some folks in the business community to pull the police department back under local control. And so there was a statewide ballot question in 2012 where the state overwhelmingly voted, more than 60% of the vote said that St. Louis should control their own police department. And so, for a while, I think it was the thought of the legislature, at least, that if they were going to reverse this, that they would have to put it back on the ballot. And they felt confident that the landscape around policing had shifted enough, in the last decade that they would be able to win that vote. We saw versions of the bill that said, this is about the number of police officers that are currently employed by the city, and they're way below on their head count. And so, if they fell below a certain number, then that would mean that state takeover would happen. So there were lots of different approaches over the years. I can't say that Empower agreed with any of them. But the other thing that we saw happen was that each year this gained more and more support, more co-sponsors, more people signing on to support what originally I think was sort of a small niche issue between then Representative Schroer and really the primary backers of this initiative, which are law enforcement, and in particular, the two police unions in the city of St. Louis have been testifying in support of the bill for a long time. If you are not from St. Louis, I saw in the chat that while there are many St. Louis folks here, there are also some folks from other parts of the state. And so I will name for you that, yes, you heard correctly. St. Louis does have two police unions in its city police department, and that is because we have a traditionally white police union and a traditionally Black police union, which in and of itself, I think, gives you some interesting historical context around policing in Missouri and in St. Louis. But putting that aside, both of the unions have been supportive, which is not always the case, right? I think the two unions don't always align on issues. And so seeing them both there, I think was a real signal to the sort of pro-law enforcement, pro-policing segment of the legislature that, this was something that they needed to support. And then I think that the real tipping point this year came when Governor Kehoe, newly elected Governor Kehoe, named this as one of the top priorities for his administration this session. So that was sort of a green light go. We saw very quick initial hearings scheduled in both chambers on this bill. There were bills, separate bills, but very closely aligned, filed in both the House and the Senate. And so, they pushed this bill very, very quickly. For those who are watchers of the Missouri legislature, you may remember that in the last few years, we have not seen a single piece of legislation passed by the full body until like late April, in some years, not until May. And so, this year we are seeing a lot less friction amongst legislators in the Capitol, and that's allowing them to do things much more quickly. So they were able to get the bill fully passed even before spring break, and the governor obviously then signed the bill this year. One of the two, I think, biggest arguments that we have heard around this, why this is needed, is one, that they claim that somehow mysteriously this is going to reduce crime in the city of St. Louis. Annie and I will talk more about why they think that, and what that might actually look like. But the other thing that they said is that this move is going to take politics out of policing. That was a refrain that we heard over and over and over again. And so, we would argue that this move doesn't take the politics out of policing at all. It just changes the politics. It shifts the control of the police from a democratically controlled city to a Republican controlled state. And I think it is the belief of the police unions that they're going to get a better deal if they are reporting to a body that is appointed by a Republican governor. And so, now we're in a position where St. Louis is back to joining Kansas City as literally the only two cities in the country who don't have control of their own police department. And I do think that it's really important. That's an important fact because one of the things that we kept bringing up time and time and time again is that there's just absolutely no proof that this would improve public safety. And we, in fact, presented a lot of data over the last couple of years that showed that while crime in St. Louis has been going down, crime in Kansas City has been going up. And so this was really a very nonsensical change if public safety was truly at the heart of it. So yeah, we can just kind of briefly cover. So what does it look like? What does it look like for the state um, to lead our police department? So the police department will now be overseen by a six-person board of police commissioners. One of those seats is reserved for the duly elected mayor of the city of St. Louis. And then there will be four citizen commissioners, all of whom had to have been a resident of St. Louis City for at least 2 years. And they cannot currently be holding any other elective or appointed political office. And they are appointed by the governor. And then there is this sort of random one non-voting commissioner who can live in St. Louis or any county that borders St. Louis, while also owning and paying taxes on a property in St. Louis City. And though this person will not have a vote, but will be in all the closed door meetings, will be able to help establish a quorum and sort of be fully involved, but will not actually have that official vote. Next slide. So what will these people do? So this slide, I mean, I cut the legalese out, but this is pretty much the language from the bill. So they will work really actively with the chief of police to hear about the day-to-day operations. They will have the power to remove a chief of police and or appoint a new chief of police. I think this one is really important. They will be able to hear and determine appeals from the decisions of the chief of police on disciplinary matters. So if the chief, imposes discipline on someone and they have a problem with it, that problem will now go to the Board of Police Commissioners. So that will, I think, be a big part of what this group is doing. They will write the rules and regulations to set the qualifications and required conduct of the personnel of the police department. The next one basically says like they ensure that the laws of the state are being followed. And then they also have regulatory power over private watchmen, detectives, and private security. And so folks will have to, they're making sure that people are being licensed and then regulating how those actors are acting. And then just a few more things that are later in the bill. It says that they basically have the power to set the number of officers that are needed, to set the salaries of officers, although it specifies in the bill that they may not reduce them below their current salary. They can only give them raises. And then that they will ultimately set the budget for the department. And I will turn it over to Gwen to talk a little bit about the budget impacts. Oh, sorry. There's one more thing there. Go ahead and talk about that too, and then go to the budget.
Thanks so much, Mallory. So I have not stripped the legalese in these next couple slides. Apologies, but it does give you a fun little tidbit. The way that St. Louis City is referred to all throughout this bill is the city of the state, not within a county. So a little bit of like roundabout way of talking there. St. Louis City is the only city in the state not within a county. But one of the really big impacts that advocates are concerned about with HB 495's passage is that any kind of forward gains that the city of St. Louis might want to take in terms of, promoting community public safety, investing in other areas of public safety protections, banning the use of certain surveillance technologies, as the BOA has passed a regulation recently that I think Mallory and Annie will talk a little bit more about. The language in the bill is very specifically that no ordinances can be passed by the Common Council, the municipal assemblies that conflict with the powers of the Board of Police Commissioners. So now we have not just the board having all control of the police, but also anything that could feasibly interfere with the police's control, which you can imagine could be interpreted very, very broadly. So this is, one little section in a very big bill that I think gives a lot of us a lot of concern. The budget language that is laid out in HB 495 sets that it sets it in a line with the city of St. Louis's general revenue fund. So if the city gets, a bunch more money, then the police budget would also have to increase accordingly. So this is a way that they tie it. So it's not, set at a certain dollar amount. It's actually set to be a percentage of our budget. That starts out at 22% for this year through the end of this calendar year, 23% for 2026, 24% for 2027, and then when fully instated, 25% of St. Louis City's general revenue fund will have to go to the police budget for 2028 and all subsequent years. So we asked ourselves, as many people did, I think, when this bill passed, what does that actually mean? So this is just a comparison to St. Louis City's current budget. So our current general revenue estimate is upwards of 580 million. You can see our total FY 2025 budget is 1,300 million, upwards of that. When we talk about the police department budget in these numbers, it is like the non-retirement fund. So there is a separate fund in the St. Louis City budget that is all of those like retirement benefits for police. And so as it stands now, the current police department budget is almost 132 million. So using the budget numbers from this year and doing the 25% minimum that this bill will require when fully instated. So again, this isn't until 2028, would would translate to a funding increase of over $13 million for the police department, or a 10% increase. So you can see, 22% of the budget, which is what's set for 2025, is actually a reduction. Right now, we're putting somewhere between 22 and 23% of our general revenue to the police budget. But starting next year, when the 23% is required, already we're seeing an increase in $1.5 million going to the police budget. And then by 2028, that increase of $13 million, or a 10% increase. So just kind of puts that in perspective. What we're really talking about here in terms of a budget increase is certainly a significant number. As we mentioned, HB 495, although the prevailing issue here is about local St. Louis City losing local control of our police, there were a lot of other provisions that were included, especially as legislators kind of wheeled and dealed and tried to get this quickly past the finish line. So there's a couple provisions in here that some Democrats have been fighting for many years. So HB 495, although for the city of St. Louis, this is a real blow, there are a couple provisions in here that advocates have been fighting for a while. So very quickly, I'm going to run through some of these other provisions. If anyone has follow-up questions, please don't hesitate. I will put my email in the chat, or Rika, actually, if you wouldn't mind putting my email in the chat right now. So if anyone that's not a coalition member, or that is a coalition member, I know we've talked about this in more detail at previous CJC meetings. So mixed bag. There's a lot here that is we're not excited about, and then a couple provisions that are worth celebrating. So one of the additional provisions included in 495 is that the Department of Public Safety must report the immigration status of anyone arrested. This is a pretty common theme that we're seeing in a lot of bills, much more extreme than this, but this is definitely related to a lot of the anti-immigrant sentiment that we have seen in the Missouri legislature and nationally. There are new annual reporting requirements set for prosecuting attorneys that hopefully will help with transparency in terms of what is happening with criminal cases. Some of those reporting requirements do include that any information about the use of informants during trials needs to be shared and reported. So that is something that advocates have been asking for a while. There is a provision that would require the St. Louis City Sheriff to hold a police officer license within 2 years of being elected. There have been some issues with our recently elected sheriff in the city of St. Louis, and a lot of controversy in that office. So we think, this is a pretty clear way of trying to kind of tamp in that individual, as the current sheriff does not hold a peace officer license. It would preemptively ban the creation of safe injection sites. Harm reduction advocates talk about safe injection sites as a way to provide like a very clinical environment for drug users. Missouri does not currently have safe injection sites, but this would preemptively ban the creation of any of those in our state. So that is certainly a setback. There were a couple provisions added about stunt driving, kind of defining the offense, outlining some penalties, increases in terms of the age of a victim in sexual trafficking of a child offenses, and an increase in the sentence in prison time. Similarly, an increase in the minimum sentence in sexual trafficking of a child in the second degree from 10 years to 20 years. Defines a new stealing offense of organized retail theft, kind of trying to crack down on groups of people that are stealing things in collaboration with one another. And then these are the provisions that are more on the positive side. There are protections for pregnant people that are incarcerated in jail, including a ban on restraints during labor, ensuring that they have access to pre and postnatal mental health care, adequate nutrition, postpartum support, things like, the seatbelts have to be used when they're being transported, things that, feel like, oh my God, shouldn't that happen for everybody in jail? Yes. But those protections do not exist, and they have not existed for pregnant people. This language made it very far last year, before kind of being struck down because of some of the things it was attached to. So really excited that these protections for pregnant incarcerated people have passed. Um, I mentioned the informants reporting with the prosecutors' reports. There's another couple provisions around the use of criminal informants in court cases, trying to decrease false testimony that's being provided by informants for a reduced sentence, or another benefit that's being promised by the state in exchange for the cooperation, which we know to be a real issue. This bill would cap the cost of phone calls in jails at 12 cents a minute. Another provision that has been in the legislature for several years now. It would establish the Committee of School Safety within the Department of Public Safety. This is a committee that would have to set some standards for Missouri schools in the event of, mass shooter situations, any other kind of like critical event, school safety events. Right now, Missouri does not have any standards set on that. And this would have experts, teachers, other stakeholders at the table to develop those standards. It would require basic training for police to include at least 6 hours of anti-racial profiling training. This is another like, we don't already have that. That's a very low amount. But we will celebrate it nonetheless. It would establish the Missing and Murdered African American Women and Girls Task Force. This is something that Senator Angela Mosley has been fighting for many years, to call out the disproportionate number of missing and murdered African American women and girls in our state. So that is a very big accomplishment that will hopefully lead to some real changes. And then it will repeal the Missouri reim I'm sorry, I think I mistyped this in here. It will repeal the Missouri Incarceration Reimbursement Act, MIRA. This is a law that allows the AG's office to seize assets that an incarcerated person might receive while they're incarcerated or might already have. Things like, the loss of a loved one leads to a life insurance inheritance, or the sale of a property, or in one case, an individual that had been held at the St. Louis City Justice Center, had been beat by guards there, won a legal settlement for the abuse that he received, and then when he was held in DOC custody, the AG's office attempted to seize that lawsuit money. So this is a really terrible law that has been on the books since the 1980s, and there's been a dedicated group of attorneys fighting against this. So we are really excited for this mirror repeal. I think that is one of the best pieces of 495. And then certainly not least, there is some language in there around wrongful conviction, the expansion of restitution avenues for people that have been wrongfully convicted. Right now in Missouri, if you were found innocent through evidence means other than DNA, so prosecutorial misconduct, any of the many other ways that someone's conviction might have been overturned through a non-DNA evidence method, you are not eligible to receive restitution. So this would expand restitution to those folks and also increase restitution amounts across the board for anyone wrongfully convicted. So even though 495 is a big blow to St. Louis City, and there is a lot to be wary of in this bill, there's a couple of silver linings that we can celebrate.
Thank you for that. Any last final words from our speakers, Mallory or Annie?
I think I'll just leave you all by saying, I know that it's not good news, right? Like if you are a resident of the St. Louis city, like I am, you might be feeling really deflated right now. And all I'll say is, we here at Empower Missouri, and I'm sure our partners and friends at Arch City Defenders are going to be monitoring this really closely, watching for that transition director to be named, watching for, names to be floated for the board of police commissioners, really scrutinizing folks that have been that are being considered for those positions, and then really following the work that that group is doing so that people can know and understand what changes are happening to our police force in a way that I fear could be a little shadowy. So we'll do our best to monitor, and we hope that all of the activists on the call who are in St. Louis will join us in keeping a close eye and just remembering that you know sunshine is the greatest disinfectant, right? So as much as we can keep people posted and informed, we all have a role to play in making sure that we are still being vigilant and keeping watch.
Yeah. And I'll just add a huge thank you to Empower Missouri and everyone who has fought so hard against these policies for so long. I mean, I think it's due to you all that it took them until 2025 to finally pass this. And I don't think that we're powerless. I think that the process for the governor to appoint folks to this board, they still have to be confirmed by at least a committee of the Senate, if not the Senate as a whole. And there's advocacy that can happen around those nominees as well as that is taking place. Everyone should do their due diligence when those names are announced, figuring out everything we can about them and advocating to the senators who are a part of the Senate Appointments Committee. I can't remember the exact name of it. The and there are some members that are local to St. Louis on that. There's opportunity for influence there, and then there's always opportunity to work to get better candidates in office and try to pull some of these things back, and try to get creative on the local level to see how we can wiggle around some of the things that they've given us here. But just thank you all for being a part of this. It can be really disheartening to see a lot of the work that we've all spent so much time on feel like it's just up in smoke. But it has mattered. It has mattered to the people that it's affected up until now, and it will matter going forward as we keep up the fight. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mallory and Annie, for taking time out of your day to break this down with us and have a great discussion on this. I hope you guys were able to learn. For all of you who joined us this morning, I hope you were able to learn something and take away. We will be sharing these slides and this recording with you all in a follow-up email, but there's also ways to get involved, right? So we do have our Community Justice Coalition, which I dropped the link in the chat. Arch City does great work. I dropped their website in the chat. We have Clean Slate Missouri, which I also focus on. We have seen a lot of strides this legislative session with Clean Slate Missouri, so we hope you can focus on that as well. I'm dropping that in the chat. We have People's Plan Coalition, or People's Plan STL, and I'm dropping their website in the chat as well. And then just for our CJC members, I know there's not that many on here, but for those who are, we usually give member updates at the end. So we have a lobby day with forward.us for the Missouri Survivors Justice Act I'm sorry, I put Wednesday, but it's actually Tuesday, April 8th. Next Tuesday, April 8th is our lobby day for our partners with forward.us. Gwen, can you quickly say something about our forward.us just for people who might not know?
Yeah, this is a national organization that is just starting to do more advocacy in Missouri, and the issue that they're bringing folks out to lobby on next Tuesday is about the Missouri Survivors Justice Act. This is a bill modeled after a bill that was recently passed in Oklahoma, and it would allow judges uh, to take into consideration that someone has been the victim of domestic abuse during their sentencing. So, say someone is in a domestic abuse situation, one day they finally retaliate, but it's not a clear-cut case of self-defense. Right now, a judge can't take into consideration all of the context there with that previous abuse when sentencing that individual. So, this bill would allow that kind of resentencing context to happen.
Thank you for that. And if you can go to the next slide, I did drop all the links in the chat. Also, this will be shared with you all. And our last slide is just our socials. As always, please, we encourage you to follow us on all our social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and even, oh, Twitter. I guess it's X. We're looking into other places right now. But yes, please follow us and we will drop Annie and Mallory and all of our emails in the chat. And thank you all for joining us. Yes, blue sky is definitely that's why you see, I skipped over it at first, but
We're
I just
working on it, you guys. We're working on it. It's been a busy session. Our comms team has been very inundated.
thank you all for joining us. We hope you guys have a great, amazing day.
Thank you, everyone.
Mm.